Okay, so can we start off with just saying your name and your title?
Rabbi Samuel Cohan, Senior Rabbi of Congregation Beit Simcha, Beit Simcha.
Um, let's start this way. Hold on, let me just pin this real quick. So here we okay. Um, how people are coming to you for spiritual guidance tonight. How are you gonna address them?
First, by remembering all those who died so tragically on October 7th, 2023, which was Simchat Torah, a day of festive joy for Jews that turned into a day of terrible mourning and tragedy, trauma. I think that what the first thing is just to remember those who died. And there were 1,200 people who died, most of them Israelis, but many Americans, French, British, Thais, Nepalese, people from 40 countries were murdered by the Palestinian terrorists of Hamas that day. And so the first thing is, of course, to remember those who have died and to say that we pray that their souls are with God and to pray for the recovery of those who were wounded and traumatized that day. And our continued prayer for those hostages that we pray remain alive. There's something like 100 that are unaccounted for still in Gaza. And in spite of a year-long war that no one really expected would go this long. So I think that's the first place that we all have to go. The second, I think, is to say, how are we going to take this awful tragedy and turn it into something that has meaning in our lives and to try to improve the world? And for me, that's an embrace of Zionism, a word that's been attacked brutally this past year. Anytime Israel shows weakness or Jews show weakness, that seems to encourage anti-Semitism. And it's so critical for people to understand that Zionism is a simple statement that we Jews have a right to have our own nation in our ancient homeland. That's it. And it's anti-Zionism is a form of genocidal anti-Semitism, a desire to destroy that. So I think it's important for us to embrace that title proudly, to affirm that we believe that Jews we have a right to our own nation and not to be attacked, not to be terrorized, and that's just a very powerful and important identity. That doesn't mean that we agree with everything the state of Israel does. No government is perfect, but we have to start with that.
I heard somebody when I was watching the Sunday shows, you had a person say, you know, during 9/11 in America, it all happened one day. And they said, you guys got a chance to heal. They said, we still have 100 people over there being hostages. He said, it's hard for us to heal. So no, he said, we haven't gotten.
Yeah, when I was in Israel in January, February, it was clear that if an entire nation can have PTSD, Israel does. Like everybody feels something powerful. And it's not just that there's some theoretical number of people held because it's a small country and everybody seems to know everybody else. I don't think there's a family, and maybe not an individual in Israel, who doesn't know people that have either died or are hostages or are relatives of them or close friends or it's from their synagogue. It's just something that's part of the fabric of life. And it's not over as long as the hostages remain held by these Palestinian terrorists.
I sent you something from the ADL, which talked about data they've accumulated since about a year ago, right?
Right.
And in it, they talked about across the country, there have been more than 10,000 anti-Semitic incidents. 8,000 were verbal or written. You had 1,800 or over 1,800 with incidents of vandalism, over 150 incidents of physical assaults. They said at least 1,200 of these uh, anti-Semitic incidents happened on college campuses. Give me your thoughts when you hear that what's going on in this country.
Yeah, and I've been talking about this a lot, both in sermons and on my radio show, and many conversations and in classes. It's really awful, and what we've seen is a deep moral failure on college campuses in particular. It's not that that's the only place anti-Semitism exists or has existed in this past year, but we've seen the leadership there embrace um, powerful deterrence for anybody showing any bias against anyone, as long as the person they're showing the bias towards is not Jewish. If they're Jewish, they're considered white colonial oppressors, and you're allowed to attack them in any possible way. And it's led to the not only these anti-Semitic incidents, but it's actually led to the removal of some presidents of Harvard, Penn, super famous, very important universities who just didn't get it and don't get it. And in a climate in which microaggressions, what seems like very minor verbal things, can lead to serious consequences, you had people physically assaulting Jews on my alma mater's campus, UCLA, one of my alma maters. They were chanting for the genocide of Jews. Crazy things like that were going on, and the administration seemed incapable of dealing with them. And I don't know that the people involved in those were all students, because a lot of them were actually activists brought in from outside of campus, knowing that you can get people fired up. But it's part of a culture that has failed to understand that terrorism is a moral failure and it needs to be recognized. Immediately after October 7th, before Israel did anything to respond, there were people cheering Hamas. Hamas, these are murderous terrorists who raped, committed arson, torture, did all of the worst and least human acts you can imagine. And yet they were being cheered on as though they were football teams that you could hope you could will to victory. And so I think that ADL is onto something. This is a serious cultural problem in our country. Look, it's not just the left that has anti-Semitism. There's been plenty of anti-Semitism on the far right. Having said that, this year brought to a head a really severe problem with a failure to recognize that anti-Semitism is race hatred. It's the oldest form of race hatred, and that needs to be addressed. It's begun to be addressed. And I think the government is beginning to address it seriously. There have been lawsuits all over the place now. Not only the Jewish organizations, but the universities themselves are finally coming to terms with this, because they have allowed a culture to be perpetuated, some of it undoubtedly paid for by foreign money, whether it's Iranian or Qatari, to encourage this hatred of Jews, knowing that Jews care about Israel. And even though we're American citizens, we care about the only nation on earth which is a Jewish country. So it's been a very bad year. At our high holiday services, we did a special hymn. We don't normally do this particular one. It's from a different Jewish tradition. It says, "Let the old year and its curses end. Let the new year and its blessings begin." And I think they are. I think it will be a much better year this year. I think most people don't support this kind of anti-Semitic activity. And campuses are feeling a tremendous backlash, and they should. And hopefully they'll respond.
There does seem to be a lot coming from the left side of politics on this, um, which some might find surprising. But let me ask you this. Why do you think it is that people, there is a segment of the population that doesn't like Jewish people? Why?
Yeah, we're different. you know, uh, look, I don't know how different I look from anybody else, but everybody's different. We Jews have been a unique population in so many countries for so long. Judaism goes back 3,800 years. And we had our own country there till about 2,000 years ago, and it was taken away forcibly. We didn't get it back for another almost 1950 years. And so when we finally got it back, there were Jews sprinkled all over the world, and Jews have a system of belief that says that we have to act morally in any circumstance. Yeah, we have somewhat different holidays and we eat some different foods, but that anti-Semitism is so ingrained in so many different cultures. I avoided teaching a class on anti-Semitism for most of my professional career because who wants to like dig into this stuff? When I finally started to look at it, it was fascinating because you can sort of see the illogic taking steps to get more and more extreme over time. Any kind of race hatred is preposterous. We are all the same. The differences between people of different skin color and different religions and different ethnic backgrounds and heights is so tiny genetically. We're all of the human race. And I think Judaism has always understood that. But that's problematic for some people too.
It's it's interesting when I think about it. I've been trying to find, well, what's going on, I once interviewed the head of the National Alliance when I was a reporter. And I said, "You don't like black people. Why?" And he couldn't answer the question. Yeah, I mean, it was like, what did I do? You know what I mean? I'm like, I didn't like,
Yeah.
I didn't do anything to you,
Yeah, like what do we ever do to you guys?
Yeah,
Conspiracy theories. I mean, there's so many fascinating. It's very interesting. It's like to me, it's a little bit like reading science fiction sometimes. The ways that people they talk about minorities of any kind of minority. Look, I've been a rabbi in a variety of places around the country. I've been in Tucson a long time. I've always felt that as a Jew in those places, I was pretty well accepted. But I also knew that there was definitely one minority that didn't like very much for whatever reason. So when I was a student rabbi in Montana, there was some anti-Semitic stuff, and the community came out to support the Jewish community. It was a tiny, tiny Jewish community. But if we had been Native Americans, I don't think the same thing would have happened. And in Tucson, I think if there's anti-Hispanic activity, even though Hispanics are probably the majority in Tucson, I'm not sure the support would be there that there has been for the Jewish community here, frankly. And it just people are always uncomfortable with difference. And we Jews have always understood that, okay, we're a little different. We better like the people that are different from us too, because we're in that boat. Um, it's very strange to me, some of the anti-Semitism that we've seen on the left, because for so long, these have been close allies of Jews for decades and decades, centuries sometimes. And it's strange to be turned on, to see your allies pulling away from you, turning against you. I've seen this in some of the interfaith groups I work in. And it's unfortunate. I don't think it's permanent, but it is fascinating to see some of those biases creep in among people that you really didn't think had them. It's distressing. There's no doubt.
So there are some people, that are concerned with the what's been going on, um, and that again, I don't know if these numbers are correct, but I believe I've heard there are 40,000 people that have been killed. You know, I
Gaza.
mean, yeah, yeah, in Gaza, and and that's part of some of the things that are going on that side of the spectrum. How do you deal with it?
You know, if you start a war against a modern military and you hide behind civilians, it's tragic what's about to happen. But blaming the nation that was attacked initially for responding is kind of blaming the victim. It's terrible what's happened to some of the civilians in Gaza. Now, those 40,000 figure, that's been a really interesting figure because it comes from the Palestinian Health Ministry, which counts, unfortunately, I mean, there's a lot of people that are dead, there's no doubt. A lot of them were Hamas fighters who were shooting rockets and machine guns and grenades and so on. If you go to war against a modern military, that's very good tactically. A lot of you going to die. It's terrible. It's terrible what's happened to the civilians, but we keep hearing about, famine and all these terrible things that are supposed to be happening, but they don't seem to actually happen. So I don't mean to diminish the suffering of Gaza, which has been brought on by Hamas's activity and Hamas's violent assault on Israel a year ago today. And we pray that the civilians who are not involved in this um, find a way to safety. We don't want to kill anybody's children. Golda Meir famously said, peace will happen with the Arabs, and she meant it in the broadest terms, certainly the Palestinians, when they care about their own children more than they care about killing ours.
Do you think folks like now that there's another front happening with Lebanon? Is Lebanon? I forgot how to say it. I think it's Lebanon. Um, do you think maybe that because now it's like I think over 1 million people displaced, but do you think maybe that government should work with Israel to get rid of folks that are Hamas that are hiding out to try to stop this? What's going on there?
Well, I think what's happening in Lebanon is fascinating because people have been really afraid of Hezbollah throughout the Middle East. Lebanese, certainly they've taken over and turned Lebanon into a dysfunctional country at best. It's barely a nation anymore. Everybody thinks Hezbollah is the strongest non-state military in the world, and they don't look like that right now. So I hope that Israel's incursion into Lebanon is limited because we've been there before and it doesn't work out well. I don't think Israel wants to occupy Lebanon in any serious way. I don't think they need a buffer zone, but they do need Hezbollah tunnels and arsenals to be destroyed. Hezbollah so far looks like a paper tiger. It looks like they were supposed to be so fearsome, and all of a sudden they've lost their leader. A whole bunch of their military leadership is gone. I don't know. I'm not a military strategist. I hope that the civilians in Lebanon evacuate when they're told to evacuate by Israel, because Israel's not playing games, and they're going after Hezbollah. And so far, they've been extremely effective and surprisingly so. My hope is that it's not a long conflict there, and that the people in north of Israel who have been out of their homes, and its numbers vary a little bit, but somewhere around 70 to 75,000 people have been out of their homes for a year. I met some of them in a hotel I was staying in. They were living in a hotel with their kids doing their homework in the lobby because they could not go back to their places in the north of Israel. At that point, they'd only been out for 4 or 5 months. It's a year now, because Hezbollah was sending rocket after rocket into the north of Israel. So, if God forbids Canada or Mexico decided to shoot a bunch of rockets at neighboring towns in America, our response would be pretty strong. Um, I'm hoping that this front does not devolve into what's happened in Gaza. I don't think it will.
Okay, my final question. I just want to go back to the what the Anti-Defamation League put out earlier today, um, and that is this: when you think about all those incidents that have happened, um, what do you think we as a society or people can do to begin to stem some of this? Because I mean, 8,000 incidents of verbal and written harassment. That's like you're afraid to go outside. You know what I mean? 1,800 incidents of vandalism, and physical assault. I mean, that
I,
just sounds crazy to me.
I think the same thing I always think, which is the most important thing for us to do is to reach across those boundary lines that are sort of unspoken in our society of race and religion and political difference, and see people as human beings and reach out to them. I will tell you, I wear a yarmulke all the time. It's white now because of the Jewish High Holy Days. I have had so many people come up to me and say, I support you. I'm so sorry to hear what's going on in Israel. Um, eh, Unprovoked. Like I'm not asking people to do that, but it is not only heartwarming, but it begins a conversation. And I've had people also say, I'm from Lebanon. I want to talk to you for a minute. And that's great because then we can talk. I think that's the way that you solve this. And when you hear people make anti-Semitic comments, or they say anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. It needs to be answered. And if you say, I don't think that's right, I think it's okay to speak up about that. And don't just say, well, I don't like to talk politics, or, oh, that's far away. I think that's what America is really good at, which is basic decency. We need to get back to that. And that means reaching out, talking to people, showing respect, and show support for the Jews that you know.